There is a saying sweeping our nation. It's just 3 little words, and it's getting more and more popular. Those words are, "Don't judge me." People say it all the time. You'll bring something up. I was asked the other day, what do you think of this subject? And after giving a biblical response, well, it's important that we don't judge other people on their lifestyles and what they're doing. You can't have the audacity to judge somebody else and their actions. Words mean things, but the words "don't judge me" they're devoid of personal responsibility and morality. They're perfect for a nation ruled by culture wars, idolatry, and cultural identity. Hollywood now deems what is morally good and what they can spew forth on our 60-inch screens and tell us what is good and what is right, and what we are to accept and what we are to not accept. But now we're supposed to accept everything, every walk of life, every action, every way a person wants to live. That's supposed to be acceptable. And how dare you to judge somebody for doing something wrong? God has set forth for us a moral standard by which we could make judgment calls. But the idea is, don't judge me, you don't even know me. There is a coalition, the Don't Judge Me Coalition, and they take popular pop stars and people in pop culture, and they use them to show forth their ideas. The genius of a actress, Kristen Stewart, who is known for her amazing portrayal in the series Twilight, which I say that facetiously, she said, "Nobody lived my life, nobody cried my tears, so don't judge me." The idea being, you don't know what I've been through. How dare you look at me and decide whether or not what I'm doing is right or wrong? The literary genius Lil Wayne wrote, "Don't judge me. You want to judge me? Put on a black gown and get a gavel. Get in line. I have court dates every other month. It's me against the world." How dare you judge him? The incredible mastermind Chris Brown wrote, "So please don't judge me and I won't judge you because it's going to get ugly before it gets beautiful." These are just some of the ideas that they spew forth for us so that we know it's important to keep our eyes away from other people's way of life and only accept what everybody else is doing. Jesus said in John chapter 7, verse 24, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge a righteous judgment." Jesus was dealing with the Pharisees. They had been judging Christ superficially, sanctimoniously. And for this reason, he says, judge not according to the appearance, but then he says to judge. Judge a righteous judgment. He immediately turns around and says, there is the right way to do this that you should be doing. Well, how does one judge a righteous judgment? Who is the righteous judge? Turn to 2 Timothy 4, and we will read verse 8. 2 Timothy chapter 4. Paul writes, "Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give to me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing." Christ is the righteous judge. What is righteous judgment? How will you be judged? Turn over to John chapter 12. John chapter 12, we'll look at verse 48. We'll start in verse 47. He says, "And if a man hear my words and believe not, I judge him not, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world." The intent of Christ is that you might be saved. Verse 48, He that rejects me and receives not my words has one that judges him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. Jesus Christ is the righteous judge. And not only that, his words that he has given to us, those are what we will be judged by. So, could we then look at something that someone is doing and make a discernment on whether or not it is right or if it is wrong? And that is very important, because more and more I hear even Christians say, well, we have to be understanding of their way of life. And it is a way to avoid the responsibility of really spreading the gospel and spreading the good news, and bypassing the fact that we do live in a world that is filled with sin. It is our responsibility to look at that and to figure out what is sinful and what is not. It would be like if a man and his wife, we'll just say me and my wife for sake of argument, were in a horror film. And we're upstairs and I'm asleep and I'm feeling comfortable sleeping through the night as I do. And you hear a loud thud. And she, of course, she hears it because she doesn't sleep. And she wakes me up and says, I heard something in the basement. And then she has to do it a couple more times. And I get up and I go down there to fulfill my husbandly duty. And I look in the basement and she's right there behind me with a flashlight. And I try to turn the lights on. The power's out. The power's out. And I say, the power's out. And it's flooded. The basement is flooded. I should have known that. And I know that I'm in a horror movie at this point. And then I say, but don't you remember that all those vagrants are hiding out in people's flooded basements and with no power in them? And that's been all over the news. I don't think I want to go down there. And she says, how dare you judge the basement? How dare you think that just because you see something that looks like a situation you wouldn't want to be a part of, and you then have the audacity to make a judgment call? We have to be able to do that in our life. We have to be able to look at something and say, that's not good. That is good. And being able to judge a situation is important. What Jesus is talking about is the way that people were looking at other people and pushing what they thought on them in a very unjust way, an unrighteous way. So let's look at the words of Jesus as we determine how to judge righteous judgment. The first thing that you have to do when judging righteously is you have to look at the cost. Turn to Matthew chapter 16. You have to determine what is the value of this. And in verse 24, Jesus says, he said unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. You want to follow Christ? You have to put yourself to the side and follow Christ. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? The idea is there is a value of your soul. If your soul is lost and you have to buy it back, what would you use to buy your soul back? Or let's say you had your soul. What would you take if somebody said, you know what, I want your soul. I'll give you my whole business for your soul. All you have to do is lie for the rest of your life and you can have my business. Is that worth your soul? See, there's an exchange rate here that you have to understand. It's all about the value of your soul. And when you look at something and you say, let me think here, I have to make a judgment call. Is this worth my soul? Is it worth it as a Christian to lie? Is it worth it, your soul, to commit adultery? Would that be worth your soul? Or to be a murderer? Is that worth your soul? That's a judgment call. You have to decide, I think I don't agree. I think my soul is priceless. And that's one of those things What is worth throwing your soul away for? Or also, what would it cost to get your soul back? In Genesis chapter 25, we read of Jacob and Esau. And Jacob was a very crafty individual. And his brother Esau was a hunter. He was more of a dullard, a hairy brute, you might say. And he was hunting one day, and he comes back from hunting after a long time, apparently very unsuccessfully, and his brother Jacob is preparing food for him. Well, just preparing food. And Esau needs food. He is starving, much like I was this afternoon. And he says to his brother Jacob, give me that so that I can eat. And what is the exchange that they go through? Jacob says, you give me your birthright, I will give you a pot of porridge. Now the birthright is authority. It is a land, an understanding that you have a title to land, you have a responsibility to the family, and you have a blessing from God. It is so important. And to give it away for a pot of porridge, just some stew, because you're that hungry, that's poor judgment. Now, could we look at that and say, you know what? I think he made a bad judgment call. Well, you have to be able to do that. And when people say, well, don't judge, you're not supposed to judge. It says in the Bible, judge not that ye be not judged, doesn't it? But we have to be able to make discernment, and that's not what that is talking about. So we have to look at the cost. Turn to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew 18. Jesus gives the parable of the unforgiving servant. And we'll start in verse 21. Then Peter said to him, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7, 490 times. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven like unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him which owed him 10,000 talents. But for as much as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. The servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion and loosed him and forgave him the debt. How much do you owe the king? As someone who is lost, how much do you owe him? You owe him 10,000 talents. That's just a number that means it's too much. You can't pay that back. How would you buy your soul? Do you have the 10,000 talents necessary? No, you do not. So it is an exchange. Look at the cost. But then, in order to judge righteously, we have to look at the character. We look at the cost, and then we look at the character. Let's look at what Jesus says about that in chapter 7 of Matthew. This is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, and Jesus says, Judge not that ye be not judged. Now, if we stop there, we could say, oh, well, the sermon's over. Sorry, we can't judge. But there's more to it. He says, for with the judgment that you judge, you shall be judged. And with what measure you meet, it will be measured to you again. And why behold thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but consider not the beam that is in your own eye? Or how will you say to your brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast the mote out of thy brother's eye. Jesus is dealing with the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and the scribes in this. And he's talking about it because what the scribes and Pharisees would do is they would cast judgment on other people when they themselves were just sick with this stuff. In chapter 5, verse 20, he says, unless your righteousness exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will in no wise see the kingdom of heaven. You have to get above that. But another thing to think about, consider yourself first. If you consider yourself, what you have done, it will help you with compassion when you look at other people. When you're considering what other people are doing, and you consider, well, how much did I owe the king? I owed him 10,000 talents. I couldn't pay that back. How much did the king forgive me? All of it. And what did I have to do? I had to fall down on my face and beg forgiveness. And he forgives me of that. And then you turn and you look to somebody else. And how much do they owe? They owe 10,000 talents. They're doing something wrong. Now, what is your judgment going to turn into at that point when you think that way? Are you going to look at yourself first? Get the beam? Imagine that you've got a board sticking out of your eye and somebody's over there with a little water in their eye. Oh man, I got this sliver. I can't get it out. I got an eyelash in my eye. And you go, oh, hang on. Let me get that for you real quick. How crazy would that be? You have to look at yourself first. But then he doesn't stop there. He says in verse 5, first cast out the beam out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to cast the mote out of thy brother's eye. So when you look at the character, the first person that you have to look at is yourself. Look at self first. Turn to Galatians chapter 6. Galatians 6, Paul writes, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, or the one with wisdom, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For every man shall bear his own burden. How does this start? He says, if somebody is overtaken in a fault, somebody is not living the Christian life how they should, they've fallen away, ye which are spiritual, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to look at that character? Restore such an one. You're trying to get them to come back. You're trying to patch it up. Considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. How would you want them to treat you is another good way to put that. If you were overtaken in a fault, how would you want them to come to you? Well, you will be tempted. You will go through difficulties. So you hope that there is a spiritual brother that will restore such an one, not someone who will look at you with disdain because you make a mistake. Your judgment has to be first introspective, and then you look at self, and then you look at sinners. Turn to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. The Pharisees bring someone to Jesus. Verse 3, and the scribes and Pharisees brought unto Jesus a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down, and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus had lifted up himself, and saw no one but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Has no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Jesus' intent is that we would be saved. When you look at the sinner, we have to hope that we can restore them, not stone them. Our goal should be Christ's goal. Our judgment, when we look at something, our intention should be, how could I bring this person back? Not, how could I stone this person? I got him. I see him doing something. I got him now. I'm going to hoard it, and then I'm just going to dump it on him. Is there a way that we could approach a brother in need the right way? And is there a way that we could approach a brother in need the wrong way? Absolutely. Turn back to Matthew chapter 18. That servant who was forgiven too much, 10,000 talents. We'll read in verse 28. The same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence, and laid hands on him, and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me that thou owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. Does that sound familiar? He just did the same thing. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his followers saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after that he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desired it of me. Should not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors till he should pay all that was due him. When we look at someone else, a fellow servant, wicked servants cannot forgive others as they themselves have been forgiven. And that is very important, because you have to, in looking at yourself first, you will then remember, I was the fool who owed 10,000 talents. And then you have to look and forgive others also. And this is one to another. But you have to desire that first they be forgiven, that they come to the knowledge of Christ. That's what the gospel is. And then you have to be able to look at the snakes. Turn back to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew 7. You look at self. You look at other sinners. Then you have to be able to recognize, look at snakes. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, verse 15, Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? Even so every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. In your judgment, in your discernment, you have to be able to look at somebody and say, this person is a false teacher. This person is bringing forth fruits that are not good. You cannot be so gullible to think that everybody who teaches because they love God. You have to look You have to look at their fruits. That's why a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. You have to be able to look and discern and know people by their fruits. That's part of judgment. That's part of analysis. Turn to Matthew chapter 23. When Jesus was told, or when Jesus said, judge not according to the appearance, but judge a righteous judgment, he was talking to people who they were judging according to the appearance. They were judging sanctimoniously. They were looking at, well, how does this guy look? He cleans himself up nice. He follows specific laws, that some of which we even made ourselves. And the way that they portrayed spirituality was wrong. It was not righteous. It was just a feel-good, look on the outside sort of religion. And when you turn to Matthew 23 and you look at verse 24, Jesus says, "You blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. You blind Pharisees, cleanse first that which is within the cup and the platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity." You have to be able to see righteousness by their fruits. And that is very important. We can clean the exterior up a whole bunch, can't we? We can look really good. We can get a nice haircut. We can follow every rule. But inwardly, if I look at somebody and I'm clean, I'm dressed to the nines, and I follow the specific little things, I fill out my attendance card every Sunday and Wednesday. And then somebody comes up and says, "You know what? I sinned against you." And what do? I wring their neck because I'm so angry at them, but I follow the rules. Is that good fruit? Is that righteousness? Absolutely not. So we have to look at self. We look at the sinners. We need to identify the snakes. And that is the character of it. But let's look at the king for a moment. Turn back to Matthew chapter 18. We'll look at the king. What did the king do? And herein is the gospel. This is what we share with other people. The king, in verse 26, the servant falls down and he worships him, saying, "Lord, have patience with me and I will pay thee all." I'll do my best, please. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion and loosed him and forgave him the debt. Was he paid the debt? No. Did he forgive the debt? Yes. That's called mercy. That's called getting something you don't deserve. That's the king that we serve. When we look at Christ and the way that he forgives, not only is the debt forgiven by the righteous king, but the righteous king himself comes on our behalf and gives all that he owns and everything that he has. He leaves heaven, he comes to the earth, and he gives of his flesh. He dies for us. And how much do we owe him? We owe him 10,000 talents. It's more than we could ever pay back. But he comes and he gives himself for us. That's the gospel. That's what we have. When we look at the king, we should run to tell our fellow servant the good news. We run to him and we say, "I know that you owe me 100. Just forget about that, but let me tell you something. The king just forgave me 10,000 talents. Could you believe that?" And he says, "Wait a second. I owe the king 10,000 talents. And I say, "Come on, let's go. Let's go see him. I'll go with you. I'll go with you and we'll go talk to the king and he'll forgive you. Because he forgave me that." Is that a little different than going to your fellow servant and saying, "You owe 100 to me?" And you wring his neck? Absolutely. It is completely unrighteous. It's completely hypocritical, because what you should be doing is grabbing them and taking them to the king and saying, "Look what you can be forgiven of. I know how much you owe. Doesn't matter. You have to fall on your face. You have to worship the king. And you will be forgiven." He gave himself for your debt. Are you a Christian this morning? If you're not a Christian, your sin has separated between you and your God. But the good news, the gospel is, the righteous judge is going to look at you and have mercy on your soul, and he will forgive you. You might owe 1,000,000 talents. You might have sins piled to the sky, but the righteous judge will look at you and forgive you because of his mercy. That's what you can have this morning. If you believe what you read, the words of Jesus will judge you in the last day. If you believe that is true, you can make the good confession here, Romans 10. You can repent of what you've done. You can come and you can fall before him, and you can be baptized into Christ and into his body, this body. If you are a Christian and you have not had righteous judgment, you have looked around, you might be able to discern good from bad, but maybe you have had poor judgment on other people. Maybe you have been too harsh on other people. Maybe you need help forgiving other people. You can do that now. We can help you. Come forward. We'll pray with you and we'll pray for you. We'll help you in any way as together we stand and as we sing.